In times like these, we all need a word of encouragement. From pastor and best-selling author Max Lucado comes the Max Lucado Encouraging Word podcast. With over 40 years of ministry and more than 145 million books sold in 50 languages, Max shares the greatest story ever told, the living Savior who brings hope for a lifetime. Through rich biblical insight, heartfelt storytelling, you'll be reminded that God is always near, always for you, and always in you. Listen to the Max Lucado Encouraging Word podcast, where hope meets your day. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts.
Each week on Culinary Confidential, Christina Cates, a seasoned foodie who has worked at some of New York City's top restaurants, will share her passion for the culinary world. Whether you're a professional chef, a restaurant enthusiast, or a lover of good food, Christina dives into the heart of hospitality, exploring the trends, triumphs, and challenges facing the food service profession. And you won't want to miss her chats with some of the most interesting and influential industry voices. And now, please take your seat at the table as Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates starts now, exclusively on AM 970, The Answer.
Welcome to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates. This show is produced in association with my dear friend, Lucas A. Ferrara. Tonight's show is about memory, resilience, and the way food tells our family stories long after the tables have been cleared. We're talking about On the Rocks, a deeply personal book by Maria C. Palmer, a daughter's unflinching, compassionate look at her father, Joe Costanzo Jr., a larger-than-life restaurateur in Pittsburgh whose life played out between the front of the house and the weight of the world behind the kitchen doors. Joe Costanzo owned the Primadonna, a restaurant that wasn't just a livelihood, it was an identity. The Primadonna lived at the intersection of ambition and endurance, the same crossroads Pittsburgh itself knows well. It was loud. It was emotional. It demanded everything from the people who ran it. And like many family-run restaurants, it didn't shut off when the doors closed. It followed everyone home. In a city known for steel, grit, and loyalty, the Primadonna offered something just as strong: hospitality, ritual, and Italian-American pride. Regulars weren't just customers. They were family. Recipes were passed down the same way stories were, with emphasis, emotion, and sometimes contradiction. On the Rocks is not a glossy nostalgia piece. It's honest, it's layered, it explores success and struggle, charisma and chaos, and love. Maria writes not just as a daughter remembering her father, but as a woman reckoning with what it means to inherit both legacy and loss. This is also a Pittsburgh story about immigrant ambition, neighborhood restaurants, and the way cities shape families just as much as families shape cities. If you've ever grown up in or around a family business, especially a restaurant, you'll recognize the rhythms: late nights, loud opinions, unspoken loyalty, and the feeling that everything, good and bad, happens at the table. There are cities that are polished, and then there are cities that are earned. Pittsburgh is not a city that asks you to fall in love with it at first glance. It's a city built on smoke and muscle memory, steel mills, shift work, generations of hands doing the same jobs until the work shaped the people just as much as the rivers shaped the land. Pittsburgh doesn't pretend to be soft. It's loyal, it's blunt, and it expects you to show up every day, whether things are going well or not. That toughness runs through its neighborhoods, its families, and especially its restaurants. In Pittsburgh, restaurants aren't just places to eat. They're places where deals are made, arguments are settled, and life happens between courses. They're where people celebrate after a win and gather after a loss. They're where grief gets managed with food and noise because silence isn't really an option. Pittsburgh is a place where weakness isn't always allowed room to exist. You show up, you power through, and you don't complain. And that mindset, especially in older generations, can be both a strength and a trap. Maria explores what happens when that toughness becomes silence, when survival becomes denial, and when love exists alongside the chaos and disappointment. And that's the world at the center of On the Rocks, the deeply personal book by Maria. She grew up inside that world, inside the rhythms of service, the tension of keeping up appearances, the loyalty that binds families together even when things are falling apart. In On the Rocks, she doesn't sanitize any of it. She writes about success and struggle in the same breath, about the pride of building something respected in a tough town and the personal cost of holding it together. Again, this is not a glossy food memoir. This is a daughter telling the truth about her father, a man who embodied that Pittsburgh toughness in every way. Charismatic, complicated, driven, flawed. A man who could command a room, build a business, and still be undone by the weight he carried. Tonight, we're unpacking On the Rocks as a memoir, a food story, and a love letter that doesn't look away. This book is as much about a place as it is the people, because Pittsburgh shapes you. It teaches you how to endure. It teaches you how to work, but it doesn't always teach you how to stop or ask for help or to name what hurts. On the Rocks is about growing up in the shadow of a larger-than-life figure. Not a celebrity, not a headline maker, but the kind of man every city has. Known, respected, complicated, and deeply human. It's about what daughters inherit beyond business and recipes, the emotional blueprints, the unfinished conversations, the questions that don't go away just because time passes. And tonight, we're talking about that legacy. Not just the restaurant or the city, but the courage it takes to tell a family story honestly, without turning away from the hard parts. Because in a town like Pittsburgh, survival is respected. But truth? That takes real strength. Okay, let me please welcome to the show Maria C. Palmer, author of On the Rocks, The Story of the Primadonna. Welcome to Culinary Confidential.
Thank you, Christina. I'm so excited to be here.
This is great. First of all, I want to tell you wholeheartedly how much I enjoyed the book, On the Rocks. I actually felt bad for liking it so much because living in it, I'm sure it was difficult at times, not only for your father, right, the story, but also for your family. So let's tell the listeners like a brief synopsis of the story.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for all of your kind comments about the book. It's
so good.
Things like that just make me so happy that we actually took the time to tell the story.
Yeah.
Because you're right. There are a lot of ups and downs in our life and certainly throughout the book. But it was quite a process. It took about 17 years from the start to finish, to actually finish the book. And the premise of it is I grew up in Pittsburgh during the 80s through the early 2000s. Very tough, in a little town called McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania, where the restaurant was. And nobody's ever really heard of McKees Rocks.
I hadn't.
Other than if you're a football fan, the Buffalo Bills number 3, Damar Hamlin, actually passed out on the field. I want to say it was maybe 3 or 4 seasons ago in a cardiac arrest. And he is, in fact, from McKees Rocks, and his mother's daycare that he raised almost $9 million for when he was fighting for his life in the hospital sits right across the street from what once was my parents' restaurant.
The Primadonna.
The Primadonna. And growing up in the Primadonna, you know, my dad, it was a rough and tumble type of town. When he took over the building and the restaurant that was there before, it was, you know, if he was lucky, 5 to 10 dinners a night.
Right.
And you're not talking here in New York, right, where there's a tremendous amount of foot traffic. There's already a built-in culinary scene.
Yeah.
People kind of want to go and try these new places. It was not like that, especially during the 80s and early 2000s. There were no cell phones. There were no YouTube influencers. Yeah. There wasn't Yelp or even Google to tell you how to get to our restaurant. So everything was hitting the pavement hard and word of mouth. And really, his goal was to be not only well-known in Western Pennsylvania, but really throughout the country and also internationally. And he, with a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, was able to get there. And at one point, we had all of the celebrities, sports stars, journalists, you name it, kind of lining up to eat at our place, which was amazing. And then unfortunately, I kind of learned growing up my dad's passion for restaurants. And I know that you know this, Christina, because I know you have the same type of passion for hospitality. This was the son that he never had. This was like his baby. And whenever I got into high school, I realized if you can't beat them, you got to join them. So if I really wanted to spend time with my dad, I needed to work there.
And what did you do there?
I started out, what I wanted to do there is I wanted to take my dad's job.
And be the face.
Be the face and be the greeter. And he laughed really hard at that. And so my first day, you know, I had grown up in the restaurant whenever I was 4 years old. He bought it. And I remember being little and filling the salt and pepper shakers and the ketchups. My first day actually working at the restaurant, I was a bus person. And I was a bus person for a number of time to kind of get my feet wet. My dad definitely kind of came from that first generation American, work mentality, definitely blue collar worker.
Yeah.
And you don't just take the top job. Even as the owner's daughter, you work your way up, doing all the dirty jobs first. So I did. Eventually, I worked my way into becoming a server. And I didn't understand. There was always a part of me growing up that had this challenging relationship with the restaurant because it took away so much time from our family.
Yeah, of
and,
course.
People in the community and my teachers would tell me how wonderful it was. And it was almost like, oh, they're just saying that because I'm the owner's daughter. And when I started working there, I actually started to feel the experience and feel all the things that the people were saying, and it kind of validated it for me.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the point where I took this love-hate, mostly hate relationship into a love not only for the industry, but for how my dad had built this empire, really. And, to see it come alive. And I always tell people, my best education was spent at 801 Broadway Avenue in McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania, not at Syracuse, not at Pepperdine, sorry.
It was
but
on the
right
job
there.
training.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as you know,
School of Hard Knocks.
you
All
get
right,
to know
so
the people. And
people, I think if they hear your book On the Rocks, they may think that it's referring to like a drink on the rocks. But On the Rocks refers to the neighborhood, McKees Rocks in Pittsburgh, where the restaurant takes place. I worked in restaurants, but I feel very connected to you on this because right now I work for my family's business, right? Like that's my full-time job. This radio thing is on the side. And my whole life, my father was a lot like your dad. Work was work, and it was what funded our whole life, like our lifestyle, and that was what needed a lot of attention. And he would work every day, every weekend. Like that was the priority. And now that I work with him in this industry, I see it from a different lens. I see how important it is to show up and work hard for your family every day and provide. And I wouldn't have had the same opportunity. Like my sisters don't work there. They don't know what it's like from the inside out. And you had that. What about your sister Kelly? Did she work in the restaurant too?
She actually did as well.
This was a family affair. Your mom worked there. Your dad worked there.
Yes.
You worked there eventually.
Yes, and she did too. So she's 4 years younger than I am.
Okay.
And so she did do a little busing, but at the time when we started to phase out of the restaurant, she was just kind of coming into high school age. So really, I would say most of my memories were spent at the Primadonna. My parents had opened up a second restaurant after all of the crazy stuff happened with the first restaurant, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Like when your dad went to jail.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
whatever.
We're gonna get into that. But my sister spent a lot of time working at the second restaurant, and that was called Cafe Costanzo. So she got it from a different angle, and I was more focused with the food and being a server. She was kind of more focused on the bar end and being a bartender.
Okay.
So, just two different personalities. But I think that she would also say that those life skills that she was able to get have paid dividends because now she owns her own hair salon.
In Pittsburgh.
And she does quite well.
A family of entrepreneurs we have here.
It is a family affair of entrepreneurs, absolutely.
Why did you feel so compelled to tell this story?
I felt very compelled to tell this story because it ended so abruptly.
Okay.
And, you had just mentioned that On the Rocks refers to McKees Rocks. So anybody that's an English major out there, like myself, On the Rocks is actually a triple entendre. So On the Rocks could mean a drink with ice cubes, right? If you're in the bar and restaurant world, it could mean McKees Rocks because the nickname for McKees Rocks is The Rocks. Or it could mean a person in sort of a little bit of a shaky type of situation. And so in our particular situation, unfortunately, things ended so abruptly because we were at the height of all of the celebrities and awards, and my dad had just gotten a Dorona Award. It was kind of before James Beard could. At the time, James Beard was only chefs, so he was not eligible to apply for James Beard. But he was eligible to apply for the Dorona Award, which is the Distinguished International Restaurants of North America.
Yes.
He's going to be super happy that I remembered that because I always get the I and the R switched. So it's...
No, you got it.
I got it. So he was able to get that award in 2001 and to reap the benefits for about a year before, unfortunately, whenever I was 20 years old and home alone, the federal government knocked on our door and my dad's name was mentioned in a federal grand jury investigation. Not that he was the subject of, that someone else was the subject of. And unfortunately, the laws have now changed. But at that time, when your name was mentioned in a federal grand jury investigation as somebody that could be a person of interest, it's automatically a criminal case and not a civil case. And
let's just paint a scene here, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Your father starts this restaurant in a rough part of town, in a rough town as a whole. He's a mailman, right?
Yeah.
So he has a very stable, nice job providing for his family, his wife and 2 daughters. He wants to start this restaurant. Everyone says he's crazy. Don't do it. His own father said, I won't back you on this, right? Like, you 100%. Will get not a dime out of me. I'm not helping you. He does it anyway. He worked every day, 17 hours a day, for years on end, with blind ambition that he just knew in his heart this thing is going to work. He gets a great review, right, from Mike Kalina. Was that the reviewer? The Post?
Yeah,
Is that
New York Post, yeah.
Changed his life overnight. Now he has a line down the street. He's got celebrities trying to get in the joint. He reaches celebrity status in the restaurant industry in this, little neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And then it changes overnight.
Yep.
And the world comes crumbling down. And you and your father had the secret together. You were the only one that knew he was being investigated by the Department of Treasury.
Correct.
How stressful was that for you? Your own mother didn't even know this at the time.
It was not a great situation. And
you almost trauma bonded.
Yes. And my dad says, if there's a couple of, things that he wished that he could have happened differently, he really wishes that I wouldn't have been the person that happened to open the door that day and been home alone. It was totally a fluke type of situation that ended up becoming almost the perfect storm. And it really, like you said, overnight, it changed our life because we went from the family in town. Yeah. Not only did my dad have the hottest restaurant around, but he was also a newspaper columnist. He wrote for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He had his own radio show, too, called Fine Dining in Pittsburgh and Around the World, where he would actually have his competition on, which was very progressive and forward, especially for that time. Nobody was doing anything like that. And he had ran for political office. And so everybody kind of knew our name. And to have it flipped around so quickly, that I think was the most troubling thing to me, is I knew all the good that my dad had done for the neighborhood.
Absolutely.
For the industry as a whole.
For his employees.
And most of his employees, I must say, especially whenever he was just starting out, he was not getting the creme de la creme, at Tavern on the Green, per se.
I wouldn't say that.
He was...
No, but he cultivated people.
He was getting, the local kids in the Rocks that might not have a positive role model to look up to. And, one of the things that I will say and give my dad 100% credit for is every single young person that came through that restaurant program with him, every single person is a successful person now, whether they're, state troopers or they are big CEOs at banks or, teachers. They're all making a positive impact. And I think a lot of it had to do with my dad and the way that he cultivated the employees. And he would always say, hey, Maria, we're not just teaching you about restaurants here. We're teaching you about life. And I think that was a very important part that made me want to then tell this story, because we had, close to 1 million customers over the years. And then all of a sudden, everything just stopped. And I felt like people needed more of an explanation.
Yeah, there's more to this story.
And so that's how the book project got started.
I love it. All right, food has a way of preserving memory, sometimes more clearly than photographs. When we come back, we'll talk about what it means to inherit a family legacy that's complicated, imperfect, and deeply human. You're listening to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970 The Answer.
Over the last 30 years, Newman Ferrara, a New York City law firm, has evolved into a national practice focused on real estate, commercial, litigation, civil rights, class actions, and other complex litigation, representing many of the city's largest property owners, managing agents, and thousands of tenants. Newman Ferrara handles some of the nation's most significant class actions and civil rights matters. Newman Ferrara at 55 East 59th Street, New York City. Go online to newmanferrara.com. That's newmanferrara.com. Listen to the firm's name partner, Lucas Ferrara, every Saturday at 10 a.m. on Dottie Herman's longest-running real estate radio program, Eye on Real Estate, on AM 970. A real estate lawyer for 35 years, Lucas is a professor at New York Law School and is also a published author with books on real estate and New York's landlord-tenant law. Tune in Saturdays at 10 a.m. to hear Lucas's unique perspective and advice on Eye on Real Estate.
Welcome back to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970, The Answer.
Welcome back to the show. We're continuing our conversation about On the Rocks and the life of Joe Costanzo Jr., what happens behind the scenes of a restaurant and what happens behind the scenes of a family. Welcome back to the show, Joe's daughter, Maria C. Palmer. Welcome back.
Thank you, Christina.
Okay, we were just kind of getting into the good stuff, right? Like
yes,
the flip of the switch overnight. We're hot in the restaurant scene, and then the world came crashing down.
Yeah.
Where do you want to go from here? How long was your dad in jail?
So it was about a 2.5 to 3 year investigation.
Yes.
And I would say that that's really where things kind of spiraled downward, especially for me. Only being 20 years old, and of course,
it's a lot to digest.
Lots. And it was, of course, a very public case, especially in Pittsburgh. I fled and I moved 3,000 miles away. At the time, I had just graduated from Syracuse. The investigation was sort of started whenever I was a junior there. And then after I graduated, I moved to LA and tried to just reinvent myself, but I guess carried the shame of what was going on back at home.
But your sister's still home.
My sister was still
in high school.
In high school, and she had just recently went to college whenever he went to prison. He was in prison for a very short time. At the time, again, these guidelines are now unconstitutional, but there were federal guidelines in place that the Clinton administration had passed, where if you had done a particular crime with whatever severity, there were these guidelines of how long you needed to go to prison for. And
I'm sorry, what did he go for? Tax evasion?
Tax evasion.
Okay.
Yeah. So they were hoping to get him on like a, mafia kind of situation.
Right, because they always thought he had some underground doings going on, and the restaurant was kind of like a facade.
Right, which was totally crap.
Yeah.
That was definitely not something that was completely unsubstantiated whenever they did their investigation. But the thing about the federal government is they have a 99% conviction rate.
Yep.
And he did actually want to plead not guilty because he was more of a bad bookkeeper than, doing this on purpose. But my grandmother at the time, who was in her 80s, told my dad, listen, I can take you going to prison for 5 months if you plead not guilty and you get the full sentence of 5 years. when you come out, I will not be here.
Oof.
And at that point, he sort of knew that he needed to go the guilty route. And, when the federal judge was sentencing him, he did say, Joe, you're a good person and a bad bookkeeper, basically. And, unfortunately, my hands are tied and I have to give you this sentence. But that was a very dark part of our story. And for several years, I think I carried that shame. And I tell people, when I moved to LA, obviously I was 3,000 miles away from my home in Pittsburgh, right? Nobody knew who I was.
It's a gift and a curse, though.
It was, in a way, but I would walk down the street and not make eye contact or say hello to people because I used to think if people said hello to me or if I talked, they would know that there was something wrong with me. I was wounded in some kind of way. And it was very hard for me to kind of come out of that deep depression, panic, anxiety. But what sort of led me on a better path is I met this crazy, amazing nun, Catholic nun. I'm a former Catholic myself, who had started an organization called Get on the Bus, and she was taking children to visit their parents in prison. And at the time, it was just a Mother's Day venture.
Okay.
But now it's Father's Day, and it's all over the state of California. But I was just so moved by her story and how she started the organization. And honestly, she is the female version of my dad. Incredibly entrepreneurial spirited, just, goes after something full gusto and really has the ability to change other people's lives. And I had seen her speak and there was something in me. It was like this little voice that said, "Hey, Maria, go up to her and just tell her your story." And so afterwards, I just did. I had nothing to lose and I felt compelled. And I told her kind of about what I had just been through, and she said, "You have to come with me and speak because when I go to Beverly Hills, people want to see people who they can relate to. And, you have really, over the course of your lifetime, your family has kind of struggled to make it in the restaurant industry, but you also lived a very ritzy lifestyle for a long time when the restaurant was making it." So she said, I feel like people can relate to who you are. And I thought about it and I wasn't quite sure that I wanted to do that. But a little encouragement from my boyfriend at the time, husband now, and I started to go on the road with this nun and tell my story. And through telling my story, it became very cathartic for me.
So you healed.
I did.
You healed yourself.
I did. And I realized by doing that I could also potentially sort of heal my family and bring my dad back to what he once was.
Right.
So when the restaurant ended, that was the worst part for him. It wasn't the going to prison. He was fine. He worked in a bar all of his life. So he could relate to the people and he got to be friends with everybody. It was just a different environment.
He can talk to anybody.
Yeah.
That's why he was good at what he did.
But not being at the restaurant was his prison.
That was his identity.
That was his identity. Yeah. That was, I think, the hardest piece for him. And so being able to work on this project and bring him back to those years and say, "Hey, Dad, why did you leave this super stable job and go off and do something crazy and, try to start this idea from the inception and, bang your head against the wall trying to get people to come in and, tell me about when did you have that first celebrity and where did they sit and what did they eat and what about the first bar fight?" And, if you're interested, it was between two women and it was over a guy with a beer gut. And my mom, Donna C., who I know you love through the story, she is the unsung hero of the story. She broke it up. Which is crazy because my mom is not the type to be breaking up a bar fight, but she did. And start to learn those stories and to see my dad come alive when he was telling them, I said to myself, this is much more than a family history. This is a book.
Okay, so when everything went down, did your relationship with him suffer? Were
No.
you mad at your dad that your family was going through this now?
No, not at all. I was mad at the situation for sure. And I felt like I had just received some really horrible health news where I needed to process it and I needed to accept it, but I couldn't change it. And I think that that was the hardest piece for me is I'm a very let's fix it. Let's understand all of the angles and then let's have a plan in place and then let's fix it. This was not a let's fix it situation. So it was really a challenge to be able to see my way through that there would be kind of a brighter future. But now looking back, over 20 years ago, I can say with confidence, I tell my dad all the time, if that didn't happen, we would have never had this book.
Right.
Because people don't want to read about somebody that's always hitting all the home runs. They just don't.
That's true. They want to hear the peaks and the valleys and the story. Talk to me about Joe Costanzo as a father versus Joe Costanzo as a public figure and restaurateur.
Yes.
How are they different, the same?
My dad just shows up as him at all times. He was not like your traditional father per se. He's a lot of fun. He's a really big personality in any room. If he's there, he's there. But there's something magical about him where you sort of want to be around him. And I think the most interesting piece that is like, I guess atypical father-like is that he's not very rules-based or judgmental at all. At any time in my life, we could have somebody that's a little shady character, being in our living room that was friends with my dad, or we could have somebody, with one of the highest statures in the city or the state. And he just saw the good in all people. And I feel like because of that, as a father, he gave me and my sister a lot of confidence. And so to this day, people tell me all the time, like, I can't believe the things that you've been able to do, especially with the book. And the greatest gift that my dad ever gave me was the ability to be able to be willing to try and not care if I failed.
Yeah.
Because I fail all the time. I really do. But people don't see all of that.
The failure is not trying at all.
Exactly. And I think that was the most valuable thing. And that transcended also into the restaurant. He gave people, his employees, confidence when they didn't really have confidence in themselves. He, learned little things about people. Like he had a black book and he would keep he still to this day does. He keeps all the people's birthdays, organized. So he'll call people and recognize them. He has this photographic memory. And I think it stemmed from being in sports whenever he was younger, and he can remember all of his coaches and, what teams he was on, and that translated into the restaurant. So if you came in, he'd be like, hey, Christina, how's your family? What's your dad doing? Like, how's your business going? Did you ever get that promotion? I heard your brother had a baby. Like, he just genuinely cared about people. And I think that definitely rubbed off on both my sister and I and helped us to be successful in life for sure. So I'm grateful that he wasn't just your traditional dad, that he was this kind of larger than life figure.
Yeah, I mean, what a different life you would have had if he just continued to deliver mail every day.
Yeah, 100%.
It would have been a little more uneventful.
Yeah, very boring, like he says. He likes to keep life interesting.
All right, we need to go to our last commercial break. Coming up, we'll talk more about food as legacy, the ingredient that defines this story, and what Maria hopes readers carry with them long after the final page. You're listening to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970 The Answer.
Over the last 30 years, Newman Ferrara, a New York City law firm, has evolved into a national practice focused on real estate, commercial, litigation, civil rights, class actions, and other complex litigation, representing many of the city's largest property owners, managing agents, and thousands of tenants. Newman Ferrara handles some of the nation's most significant class actions and civil rights matters. Newman Ferrara at 55 East 59th Street, New York City. Go online to newmanferrara.com. That's newmanferrara.com. Listen to the firm's name partner, Lucas Ferrara, every Saturday at 10 a.m. on Dottie Herman's longest-running real estate radio program, Eye on Real Estate on AM 970. A real estate lawyer for 35 years, Lucas is a professor at New York Law School and is also a published author with books on real estate and New York's landlord-tenant law. Tune in Saturdays at 10 a.m. to hear Lucas's unique perspective and advice on Eye on Real Estate.
Welcome back to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970. The Answer.
Welcome back to the show. You're listening to a conversation about family, food, and truth centered deeply on the personal book On the Rocks by Maria C. Palmer. Welcome back to the show, Maria.
Thank you, Christina.
Let's talk about some exciting things you have that are spiraling from this book, right? What's on the horizon for On the Rocks?
Oh, my
And
gosh.
Joe Costanzo.
Oh, so much. So I think we chatted a little bit that the book, after 2 years of being out, has film and TV rights. And
I love it.
We are now actively in production. We started in October of 2025 with Venture Road Pictures, and Ryan Rust is directing it, and Crystal Grandy is producing it. We've captured about 2 days worth of footage from not only my dad, but my mom, the former
Donna.
chef, Pino Costanzo, my dad's cousin, who's kind of integral to the story.
Yes.
And we just got our fourth investor, so that will take us through all of the interviews. They're hoping to edit it using archival footage, interviews, and then also some historical reenactments. But obviously, that's the part that's a little expensive. So we will see. What has also been incredibly life-serving and giving for our entire family is, although we're not back in the restaurant industry, we are tangentially touching it. So because of this book, it spurred a lot of food nostalgia, because especially back in the time that we were in business, people came and they went to restaurants for the experience, and the customers were always first. So we've created some really cool trademarked experiences. One is called Cook and Book, where I go all around the country and we make a pasta dish for about an hour, hour and a half, and then we sit down and have a meal and a discussion, not only just about the book, but about the story as a whole or the restaurant industry, and now also about the movie too. I have a pop-up restaurant that happens normally on, I would say, a biannual basis, because every time I do it, something crazy happens to remind me why we're no longer in the restaurant industry. So the second time we did it, the person that was going to be our head chef, because my dad and I MC for the night, unfortunately, he had a medical crisis. And at the last minute, we had to save face and call my dad's former head chef, who is also his first cousin, and ask him to cook. So after, years of kind of a strained relationship between the two of them, they were back in the kitchen. And then the third time around that we did it, Pittsburgh actually lost power for 5 days. So people came to our event and they hadn't showered in almost a week.
Crazy.
So, yeah, that's the last time I did it. So we will do it again, but I feel like it's the universe telling me, yes, although this is fun, do not do it again.
No, I think this is going to make such a great movie.
We're excited about it. Really excited about it.
You know what we didn't talk about in the first segment? We touched briefly about the review that changed the trajectory of the Primadonna, right? That review from Mike Kalina.
Yep.
I thought it was very interesting how he was this prominent food reviewer journalist who rated everything on a fork review. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 forks. 5 being the most you can get. Your father wrote to him every week for 2 years or something saying, please come review my restaurant. And he finally came, gave him the 4-fork review, which shot him up into like another level with this restaurant, right? This is when it took the turn. But he wound up committing suicide.
Yes.
And he was under his own amount of pressure, right, in the Pittsburgh area. He was taking money from people to get these good reviews. Everyone except your father. Your father, he gave an honest review, and he eventually gave him the 5 forks, which was like unheard of, and especially in McKees Rocks. And I think like those kinds of stories, and a TV setting. I mean, it's like hook, line, and sinker. How can people not watch this? This is going to be unbelievable.
Yeah. I mean,
there's drama. I mean, it's Pittsburgh.
There's a lot of drama behind it. And, you know, with Mike Kalina, he was the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette restaurant reviewer. He was also the Phantom Diner, and he wrote for the New York Post, and he was wrote, you know, for the Times as well. He was part of a federal grand jury investigation that was also not substantiated. They had claimed that people paid to get into his cookbook.
Right.
And possibly that did happen with the cookbook, but that's not necessarily an illegal thing to do. But you're right. He never had my dad pay for anything. And, you know, in the 17 years that he was the reviewer in Pittsburgh, he only gave 16 Five Forks. So if he was having people pay for reviews, you would think that he would have a lot more Five Fork reviews. So that was also kind of unsubstantiated. But you're right. Like, there was sort of this cloud of smoke behind all of it. There's a lot of juice and, you know, things that you can kind of dish into this story for sure. And it's complicated. He's a very big personality, and he's a very complex character.
But I think the greater takeaway from this is that there are a lot of restaurants like this, right? Mm-hmm. This is the story that people don't know about the industry. It's not glamorous all the time. It takes a toll on you personally. It takes a toll on your family. You just happen to put it down in writing and you're bringing awareness to it. But there's stories like this all over the country, all over the world. The industry, we want you to think we've set the stage perfectly and it's just a show. But behind those kitchen doors, the drama is there.
Yes. Yeah. A lot goes down that you don't really realize. And I think that that's why people relate to the story, because it is a story about a restaurant. It's certainly a story about a family as well. But I think more deeply, it's the story about a human, right? And the duality of what it means to be human, and the very things that make us great can also be the seeds to our own destruction.
So what does your dad think about this turning into a movie or a TV series? He obviously is a fan of the book. It was a trip down memory lane.
Yeah, he's a big fan of the book. He's also a big fan of the movie, too. We were very lucky. The book was on the front page of the Sunday paper and the Post-Gazette. The movie was actually on February 1st on the front page of the Sunday paper and the Post-Gazette. But our article had gotten so much traffic because they put it out on Thursday before that we were actually teased on the front page of the Post-Gazette. So there's a lot of local interest and steam in this, and Pittsburgh people love Pittsburgh people.
That was going to be my next question. What do the Pittsburgh people think of this?
They're so excited.
They're rallying for you.
Oh, my gosh. They love it. And the thing is it's their project, too. It's not just my project. They're all part of the story. And, you know, my dad did little things like somebody would come in and say, hey, can you make this pasta with shrimp and green peppers and olive oil and garlic and butter? And he's like, yeah, sure. And then he would just name it after the person and put it on the menu.
And I mean, he had the veal Maria named after you.
He did, but I hate veal. That was not the thing that I was most excited about. But yeah, you know, people did like that dish for sure.
What was the most popular dish there?
I would say it was probably your traditional like chicken parmesan because he pounded the chicken out and then they breaded it and pan fried it instead of sticking it in the fryer, and then baked it and melted the cheese. It was really quite delicious. He also loved the spaghetti con sausage, which was a local vendor, Richie Sausage. It's still alive and well. And they took the sausage out of the casings and they made the sausage into meatballs.
Oh, wow.
And it had kind of like the spicy sauce, marinara sauce on top of it too. But really every dish was popular in its own right. He had over 32 different made-to-order pasta dishes, which you don't get now.
No way.
So it was kind of crazy.
You have to keep that food inventory tight. I mean, cost of goods are through the roof now.
Yep.
That's great. All right. So when can we expect the movie out?
So there's going to be a trailer that will be out here in the spring. Ryan is hoping to get done with all of the interviews throughout the summer and kind of have a rough cut in the fall. And then our hope is to shop this around and sell it to a major streamer within the next year. He still wants to do some historical reenactments, which obviously are quite costly to do. So, we're hoping this whole process takes about 2 years from start to finish.
Wow.
So,
well, that's exciting, and it's something to look forward to.
Absolutely.
I'm happy for you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And thank you for taking the time to come in the studio tonight. I love the book, Grab on the Rocks by Maria C. Palmer. It's a great read, especially with the summer coming up. This is a good beach read, if you ask me.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move into our ingredient of the week. And this week, our ingredient of the week is San Marzano tomatoes. This week's ingredient is not just a pantry staple, but a symbol. Why? Because they represent simplicity done right. When treated with respect, they don't need much. Just time, care, and restraint, much like family stories. San Marzano tomatoes are dramatic yet disciplined, bold in character but never messy, much like the personalities that drives Maria's story. Grown in the volcanic soil of Mount Vesuvius, these tomatoes carry intensity with elegance. They're naturally sweet, low in acidity, and smooth on the finish. No excess, no bitterness. When cooked, they transform into something richer and more complex without losing their identity. That's the parallel. Like the Primadonna and Joe Costanzo, San Marzano tomatoes thrive on balance. Passion tempered by restraint, tradition meeting tension, strength softened by patience. They remind us that the most compelling stories and the best flavors don't come from doing too much, but from letting the essentials speak. Some practical ways I like to use them are slow simmered in a marinara sauce with garlic and olive oil, or a base for a Sunday gravy, or just crushed raw with salt for bruschetta. It's important to note, San Marzano tomatoes are often imitated but can't be duplicated. To truly qualify as a San Marzano tomato, it must be grown in a specific region of Italy. These tomatoes are protected under DOP law. They require proper certification, and the label must say San Marzano del Agro Sarnese Nocerno DOP. It should also have that DOP seal and a consortium mark. I tell you this because if you've ever spent time in the canned tomato aisle at the grocery store, you will notice dozens of brands with labels that say San Marzano type or style, grown from San Marzano seeds, California San Marzano. These may be good tomatoes, but legally they cannot be labeled San Marzano without that DOP status. Thank you for listening to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates, Sunday nights at 9 p.m. on AM 970 The Answer. On the Rocks reminds us that family stories don't have to be neat to be meaningful. They just have to be told honestly. Food feeds the body, but stories feed memory. And when we're brave enough to tell them, they can heal more than we expect. And thank you to Maria C. Palmer for coming into the studio and sharing her family story. Tune in next week for a Passover special episode where history, heritage, and flavor come together. From tireless traditions to the stories behind the Seder table, we're digging into what makes Passover so meaningful. That is the show for tonight. Thanks for listening and have a great night.
The preceding program is sponsored by Shake It Off Live, LLC.
In times like these, we all need a word of encouragement. From pastor and best-selling author Max Lucado comes the Max Lucado Encouraging Word podcast. With over 40 years of ministry and more than 145 million books sold in 50 languages, Max shares the greatest story ever told, the living Savior who brings hope for a lifetime. Through rich biblical insight, heartfelt storytelling, you'll be reminded that God is always near, always for you, and always in you. Listen to the Max Lucado Encouraging Word podcast, where hope meets your day. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts.